Welcome to our New York Giants Preservation Society meeting for tonight, Thursday, January 23rd, with Eric Ray. Eric has two books about baseball, people having stories, personal stories during games and stuff. So he's going to share that with us. Before we get started, I'm going to just inform you of a few things. I want to send out my condolences to the Mizell and the Kelly families over their recent losses. Both are outstanding members of our group. To those who sent in donations, much appreciated. Next week, we have William Behrens. He'll be on. He is the sculptor of the Hall of Fame Giants around Oracle Park. Also, the Tom Seaver statue and the Jackie Robinson and Pee Wee Reese statues at the Brooklyn Cyclone Stadium. I forgot the name. They change it every year. He also
It's in,
did
it's in
Tony
Coney
Gwynn.
Island, though.
Yes, in Coney Island. He also did Tony Gwynn, and he does some famous busts as well. Um, just so you're aware, when I watch sportscasters at home and then they start drinking their coffee, I just think it's pretty unprofessional. That being said, I tested positive for COVID tonight. So I have apple
Yeah.
juice, so I am not in the best of moods. I was supposed to go to the Baseball Writers Association of America dinner Saturday, and that is now out the window. So,
Oh,
yeah, I also sent out something. The New Jersey chapter of Sabre is having an opening day at the Yogi Berra Museum. And everybody here is invited if you're on the East Coast. Well, if you're on the West Coast and you want to fly here, that's great. But you do not have to be a Sabre member to attend. And that's via Donna Muscarelli. So uh, Eric had two books out. One is called Bases to Bleachers. And his newer one, Backyards to Ballparks. So why don't we all welcome Eric Ray. Eric, the floor is yours. Welcome to the New York Giants Preservation Society.
thank you, Gary. I'm sorry about your COVID situation.
Uh,
I hope you're not feeling all that bad.
it's always
But
a pleasure to be here with you guys, so that's why I'm here.
well, anyway, thank you for inviting me, and thank you, guys, for sitting in on this. I appreciate it, Jeff. I'm glad to see you again. It was really good to be able to meet you when I was on Long Island in October. Let me get right into it. First, about 30 seconds on my baseball lineage. As I was growing up, the only team in town was the Yankees. So I was a Yankee fan. When you're 7, 8 years old and Mickey Mantle's running around the outfield and hitting home runs, what more could you possibly want? I grew up on Long Island. When the Mets came around, I became a Mets fan as well as a Yankee fan. I went to the game when they retired Mickey Mantle's number. Um, that story is in one of my books. Um, and soon thereafter, especially after Steinbrenner took over, I began the rest of my life long hatred for the Yankees. I moved to San Francisco. I didn't really move here. I came out here and I wound up never going back. Anyway, I remained a Mets fan. And when my kids started following baseball, and I so clearly remember the first game I took them to, and they basically forced me to become a Giants fan. So right now I have a dual allegiance to the Mets and the Giants. In August of 2011, I was at a ball game with my wife and my daughter. We have season tickets and a friend. And when you're at a baseball game, the pace of the game, and I am not saying it's too slow as opposed to what many people feel, the pace of the game allows you to think, talk with your neighbors, or just kind of look around. And I was doing this one day, and I just turned to these people I was with, and I said, "So, what's your favorite game that you have ever been to, or your favorite moment at a game, whatever?" They told me. I went home, and I sent an email to about 30 people discussing my uh, few favorite games. One was being at Mantle's retirement day. One was the first World Series game in 2010 when I went with my daughter, and there's a reason why that was so meaningful. It wasn't just I was at a game. the day that a photographer took a picture of Dusty Baker with his arms around my kids at spring training. So I had these six or so events, incidents, but there was no story there. And I sent an email to about 30 people with this and asked what their favorite games were. And I included my friend Andy, who likes baseball less than anybody I've ever known. And I did it basically just to bust his chops because that's what Andy and I do with each other. We just give each other a hard time. And he came back with a story that was so personal, so intimate, and sad, really, about going to the only game he ever went to with his father. It was a Giants game, and Dave Kingman was his second game or whatever it was. And the story was so amazing that I knew that I had to write this book. And then I asked those friends to ask their friends. I asked more friends. If you were walking down the street and you had a Twins shirt or a Colorado Rockies hat, whatever it was that identified you as a baseball fan, I was telling you about this book that I'm writing. Do you have a story that you'd like to contribute? Um, but because I'm from New York and because so many and live in San Francisco, and so many of my stories are Yankees and Mets and Giants, and my wife's from Chicago, so there are Cubs stories. I decided that I wanted to try to expand the breadth of where I got these stories from. So I joined some Facebook baseball groups. Now, those of you who are on Facebook know the joys and the not so joys of being on Facebook. But I will say that for the purpose of my book, it really totally widened where I got stories from. By the time the first book came out, I had 1,250 stories from 17 different countries. By the time, and I knew that there were so many wonderful stories that I didn't include. My wife reminded me that I couldn't use all my great stories in one book. I had to leave some for the next. I'm sure many of you have seen the movie Ghostbusters and probably think it was a great movie. And if you've seen Ghostbusters 2, you know how incredibly awful it was. And I didn't want my baseball book, I didn't want my second book to be the book version of Ghostbusters 2. Anyway, by the time the second book came in, I had about 2,000 stories. And by now I've got about 25, 2,600. I'm including the ones that are in the book. And, I may well do a third book. So with that, I'm going to read you some of the stories. And I want to emphasize the fact that most of the stories, many of the stories are not really play of game related. They're more this. You can't see me pounding my chest, but it's that. It's the heart and the soul and it's the emotion and the memories and all that. And you will probably see that. Per my discussion with Gary, most of the stories I will be reading today are Giants related. A few of them are New York Giants. Most of them are San Francisco Giants. But for anybody who's actually interested in getting the books, I want to be clear that this is not a Giants-centric pair of books. Probably a disproportionately large number of the stories are Giants because that's where I know so many people. But I do not want anybody to think that it's all Giants. I see my friend Tom. I see my friend Dan. Nice to see you guys. So let me
Great to
start.
be here.
And I'm going to be watching the time. I could read incredible stories for like 4 hours. I obviously won't be doing that. Um, this first story was from somebody I never really thought of as a baseball fan, and it was my uncle. And we were sitting there one day. I was visiting him in New Jersey, and he started telling me this story, and it was about something that I never would have included before, which is being at a game, watching a game on television or listening on the radio. That wasn't what my initial thought was. I could not leave this story out. It's in the second book. It's from the chapter I saw it on TV, I heard it on the radio. I did not understand the importance of the following event when it occurred, although I distinctly remember it. Many decades later, I still remember it clearly, but I have a much better understanding of its significance. I was 7 years old in 1934 when the second Major League All-Star game was played at the Polo Fields. We couldn't afford going to games, but I sat crowded around a radio with my dad, my brothers George and Richard, and probably a few other relatives listening intently. Richard was a Yankees fan, and George, that was my dad, by the way, and George probably as well, although we wound up becoming a Red Sox fan after meeting their owner. I just knew I couldn't follow my older brothers. I had to be contrary, so the New York Giants, along with the Detroit Tigers and Hank Greenberg, became my team. On that day, July 10th, 1934, I was listening as Giants hurler, future Hall of Famer Carl Hubbell stood on the mound representing the National League, ready to face a fearsome fivesome of American League sluggers. I'm sure all of you know all about this. To open the game, he allowed singles to Charlie Gehringer and Heine Minouche, and then, as befitting an all-star game lineup, he faced the epitome of murderer's row. Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, and Jimmy Fox. They all went down in succession, all victims of strikeouts. We could hear through the tinny radio the electricity in the stadium. Because the game was in New York, there were certainly as many American League and Yankees fans as National League and Giants fans, but it seemed to me that every successive strikeout unleashed an even greater roar. Hubble began the next inning by striking out Al Simmons and Joe Cronin. I felt that my joy, compared to the agony of my brothers, matched the sounds coming through the radio, although, of course, not with the same volume. In the 2015 All-Star Game, Mets pitcher Jacob deGrom struck out the side on 10 pitches in his one All-Star Game debut inning. That was very impressive, but it brought me back to the amazing day 81 years ago when I sat wide-eyed and open-mouthed listening to the second All-Star Game. Again, I wasn't thinking about its meaning at the time. I just enjoyed the action. I sure understand now what it meant to strike out 5 consecutive future Hall of Famers. And that's from my uncle, David Gray. I have just a couple of stories in each book. So when I talk about these books, and I do think that they're great, it's not me being some arrogant jerk because I've only written 4 stories in the book. I mean, there are 275 stories in the first book and 325 in the second. I always think of how incredibly fortunate I was that people trusted me with their stories, in some case, very intimate memories. This is one of my stories. And I will make an admission at the front. I've got some of the details at the very end wrong. They really don't matter that much to the story, but in case anybody wants to fact check me, mea culpa. I didn't do a good enough job. After 50 years and attending hundreds of ball games, I had never seen a no-hitter. I wasn't there on June 13, 2012, when Matt Cain stepped onto the AT&T mound, but I was watching on TV. My wife, Lynn, and I watched the whole thing, and our daughter, Rachel, was working at the park as usual for home games. As our collective favorite player, Matt Cain, was tossing more and more zeros, 0 hits, 0 runs, 0 errors, 0 walks, the tension and anxiety began to rise in our household. From 3,000 miles away, 4-way texts began with our son David, who knew we should be going to sleep, but couldn't pass on the chance to watch history be made. Gregor Blanco's catch in the 7th was the first breathtaking moment. For the last play, a tough hop to Joaquin Arias, who had replaced Panda for defensive purposes, made him step backward, taking away any momentum toward first. The play was made, Cain pumped his fist, and then came the phone call, a brief one at 1 o'clock in the morning or so from David. This was history, just a 20-second perfect game ever. It was our favorite player who had accomplished his feat, and it was obvious that once again, this magical game of baseball had connected the 4 of us from our home in San Francisco to the press elevator in the park, to an apartment in DC, to the pitcher's mound. 5 years later, Lynn and I got tickets for the last game of the 2017 season. Lynn likes this game, Fan Appreciation Day, at which prizes are given away like water to racers in a marathon, and players throw balls into the stands after the game. But I went that day because I knew it was the last game Matt Cain would ever pitch. Several years of ineffectiveness, caused in part by the injuries that suddenly plagued this once impervious horse, had resulted in his decision at the relatively young age of 33 to hang him up rather than to keep pushing to regain a past magic. We knew we'd get to start one last time after half a season of doing bullpen mop-up work. He did, and he was magnificent, reaching back and pitching like the Matt Cain of old. And fittingly, befitting the name, the term coined for his name, he got caned, receiving no run support. He pitched 5 innings, the last reputedly on fumes and adrenaline, and took the loss. Still our guy, I thought, as today I watch the ceremonies inducting him onto the Giants Wall of Fame. And it still makes me teary when I read this story. He will be my last ever favorite player. This is a story from my first book, and I'm going to take a minute to explain why it's so important. Um, as I kind of alluded to before, the stories in the book were all going to be originally about being at a game. And when I met this friend of mine, I spent my career working for Department of Labor, a program called Job Corps. If you guys know what that is, it's job training for underprivileged youth. And I met Sarah, and she was on some of the work groups that I led, and we became good friends, but we lost touch. And when we were in Minneapolis visiting Lynn's family, I reached out to her, and we were having lunch. And I told her about this book I was writing, and she said, "Well, I don't really have any stories, but send me your book description, and I'll have lots of friends who will send you stories." Well, none of them did, but I got this the next day from Sarah. And what's so important about this story is that it doesn't take place at a game. When I got it, the first thing I thought was, this is a great story. And the second thing I thought was, there's no place for it in the book. And the third thing I thought was, how could there not be? So this is Sarah's story. I'm not a fan of any sports. I've been to a few baseball games, but only when I'd get free tickets and go for the experience of drinking beer, eating stadium food, and just having a good time with friends. It's not that I don't like baseball. I just don't know much about the game, who the players are, or the rules. I was in Chicago for a Job Corps conference, meeting my friend Pearl in the bar of the hotel where I was staying. When I got to the bar in the late afternoon, there were a few people there, but not Pearl. An older gentleman was sitting alone at the bar, and I felt it would be safe sitting next to him, as I preferred not to sit alone. I asked if I could join him while waiting for my friend. We had a few drinks, chatted about life, my job, the fact that I like working with young adults, and that I was excited to see my friend who I hadn't seen in quite a while. He shared little about himself. I was just glad that I felt comfortable with him and that we could sit there together. When Pearl showed up, I turned to the man and said, it was nice to meet him, although we didn't know each other's names. I introduced myself and he said, nice to meet you, Sarah. My name is Ernie Banks. We shook hands and I went to sit with my friend. My friend, a native Chicagoan, asked who I was talking to. And when I told her, she started to shake a little and she said, that's Ernie Banks. Do you know who that is? And I said, well, yes, he's the man at the bar. She said, oh my God, that's Ernie. He's Mr. Cub. You have to go ask for his autograph. He's the most famous Cub player ever. So I wandered back over and said, Mr. Banks, my friend over there tells me I need to get your autograph. You're Mr. Cub? You must have been one great basketball player. Well, that sure made him laugh. And he said it was great to be in Chicago having a casual conversation with someone who had no idea who he was. And by the way, he played baseball with the Cubs, not basketball. He gave me an autograph and wished me luck. Oh, the questions I could have asked and the things we could have talked about. We had a good conversation, a few laughs, fun moments. Two strangers keeping each other company on a slow afternoon in the bar. Everyone to whom I tell that story laughs as soon as I mention Ernie's name, and they can't believe I had no idea the Cubs were a baseball team. I still have that autograph somewhere. He even wrote good luck with Job Corps. And a year after the book came out, Sarah found the autograph and she sent me a scanned copy of it. It was too late to get into the book, of course, but I had no doubt that that was a very legit story. This is from a chapter in the first book that's called The Negro Leagues. And it's actually a story not given directly to me, but from somebody else from a program. And I was given the okay to use it, and you'll get a kick out of this one. I'm often asked about my greatest game or day. That's an easy one for me. It took place on opening day, 1943, Memphis, Easter Sunday. In my first at bat, I hit a double and followed that with a single. On my third time up, I hit the ball over the left field fence. On my next at bat, I hit the ball to deep left center. It looked like it was going out, but I kept thinking, hit the fence. The ball did bounce off the fence and between the left and center fielders. As I pulled it to third base, the coach was waving me home for an inside the park home run, but I stopped. I wanted to hit for the cycle. That night, relaxing in my room, the team's publicist called me down to the restaurant to meet some folks. The owner's daughter was a school teacher. I walked up to her and said, hello, my name is Buck O'Neill. We were married 51 years later. That is my favorite day, hitting for the cycle and meeting my wife. And that's from Buck O'Neill. This is a story from a friend of mine who you guys know and is sitting right there. San Francisco is a great baseball town, home to many well-known personalities over the years. One of those hometown boys was my second cousin, Francis Joseph Lefty O'Doul. Cousin Frank played in the majors and both played and managed in the Pacific Coast League before the Dodgers and Giants came west. His major league career was good. Sorry, but not great. He helped bring professional baseball to Japan. He was better known in San Francisco as a native son and man about town. In 1958, Lefty opened Lefty O'Doul's restaurant and cocktail lounge on Geary Street. Over the years, I had the occasional opportunity to visit Frank. The place became famous, the place for baseball fans from all over the world. In 1998, Jim Bofus, Lefty's longtime friend, was able to purchase the restaurant and kept the historic watering hole afloat. If not for Jim and later his son, Lefty's would not have continued. I became good friends with Jim and Nick. I retired in 2007 and vowed to attend as many Giants games as possible. My granddaughter, Caitlin, once pointed to Oracle Park and said, "That's where Papa goes to church on Sundays." Needless to say, O'Doul's became the place for me before and after the ball games. This was great. I could meet, talk ball, visit with folks from everywhere. It was wonderful to meet Japanese baseball fans who remembered Frank as the father of baseball in Japan. Tourists from Europe and down under would ask, "How long is a game?" I felt lucky to be able to talk with the media, ball players staying at the nearby St. Francis Hotel, and even umpires. I came to think it was my place to act as the PR guy for Lefties. You never know who might drop in for a meal or a beer. One day, while I was sitting at the bar sipping a cold one, an older gentleman came in and asked if the bar stool on my left, with legs made of baseball bats, was empty. My response? Join me. Soon the conversation turned to baseball. I said I'd played as a kid, and he said he played a little ball too. I instantly knew who he was. Shit, I said, you're in the Hall of Fame. He was none other than the great Bob Feller. You never know who you might meet at Lefty O'Doul's. I paid for his drink. That's my friend Tom O'Doul. This is a story from the chapter that's called My First Game. And today I'll be reading several stories. As you all well know, the Giants have taken a couple of really big hits in terms of the greats having passed away in the last couple of years, and I will honor three of them today. I saw my first game on June 10th, 1970, when I was 7 years old. It was the Pirates versus the Giants at Candlestick, in a game featuring five future Hall of Famers: Mays, McCovey, Perry, Stargell, and Clemente. A sixth, Juan Marichal, didn't pitch that day. My dad's from Canada, and he hates cold weather. I'm sure he picked this one because it was a day game. Candlestick at night was not a place he would go, but that afternoon the whole family was in tow: Mom, Dad, my older sisters, Lori and Christy, and me. We started the day in the cheap seats, but moved down behind home plate by the eighth inning when the score was 2-2. Lori asked what happens if the game ends in a tie. Dad explained there'd be extra innings because baseball games don't end in ties. This information was received with much consternation, moaning, and groaning from my sisters. They were done, and they wanted to go home. I told Dad not to worry. Mays was up first in the bottom of the eighth, and he wanted to go home too. He was sure to hit a home run. Dad started to tell me baseball didn't work that way, that even Willie Mays couldn't hit a home run anytime he wanted. Mid-explanation, there was a mighty crack from Willie's bat, and the ball flew over the fence and into the bleachers for a home run. The Giants went on to score a second run that inning on a homer by Ken Henderson. The final score was 4-2 Giants. My sisters were spared of the agony of extra innings. About 40 years later, I met Mays, and I told him that story, that in my first game, he hit a homer in the eighth to break a 2-2 tie. Bob Moose, Willie said. They said I was no good in 1970. I assured him that in my eyes, at the time and now, he was the greatest. I'm still amazed he was able to name the pitcher he'd hit that home run off of, one of 660 lifetime homers, with so little information. I am still a Giant fan, thanks to Willie. That's from Tim Wilson in Alameda, California. Here's a story about one of the other greats. Now I see my friend Charles is on the on this call. Charles, I if I knew you were on here, I would have read your story. This is about Willie McCovey, but it's also a lot longer, and I kind of planned out my time pretty specifically. So Charles has a great story about Willie McCovey. Here's another one.
No problem. Don't worry about it.
When Barry Bonds hit number 71 and 72, I found myself sitting two suites away from my hero, Willie McCovey. I told him I try not to bother famous people, but he was my exception. He said, and I'm not going to do the accent, "No problem, Ford. It happens all the time," in his gentle Alabama drawl. I told him that when I married my beautiful and very funny wife, he asked me if I loved her or Willie. She asked me if I loved her or Willie McCovey more. So I lied. He thought that was very funny. We spent some comfortable time in the tight, crazy, painful ball game evening telling stories and laughing. I was so grateful for the time with my hero. He did not disappoint. That's from the chapters that's titled An Autograph, a Picture, a Chat with a Star. This is a story from a guy that my wife and I were on a cruise, and we were with some friends, and we were together like the whole time except this one night. So we went into the dining room, and they sat us, and this guy jumps up as we sat down, and he says, "Hi, my name's Alan Foudy. This is my wife, Jane. We're a couple of rednecks from Texas." Honestly, I didn't really know what to do with that one because I certainly didn't want to get involved in a political discussion. And it turns out, and I hope nobody, I don't offend anybody, he's not as red as he seemed to imply. They're actually great people, and this is his story. My wife Jane and I rank between a 5 and a 6 on the baseball fan scale. We like to watch games on television and try to attend a number of games each season, especially if our favorite team, the Rangers, are having a good year. In the summer of 1993, the Angels were having a good season. Attendance was up, and one of my all-time favorite pitchers, Nolan Ryan, would be pitching against the White Sox. We loaded up and headed to the ballpark. I should have asked him what he meant by loaded up. Maybe it's better I didn't ask. We found our seats, and right in front of us was a young couple in their mid to late 20s from Australia. As we began to chat before the game, they told us where they had been and what they had seen. They were having an adventure, making friends and memories on their travels. Their mates back in Australia told them they needed to go to a baseball game while in the United States, and this was the night. After several innings of strikeouts, walks, pop-ups, grounders to second, the score was 0-0. The young man turned to his girlfriend and in a typical Australian accent said, "Well, this is bloody boring." He couldn't understand why Americans were so excited about baseball. His next step? Buy a couple more beers from a nearby vendor making the rounds. Rangers pitcher Nolan Ryan, 46-year-old future Hall of Famer, was having a so-so game the first few innings. The Sox batting coach was having his hitters crowd home plate to protect the outside corner. Getting frustrated, Ryan started throwing inside, moving the batters back to increase the strike zone. Robin Ventura, you guys know what's coming next? Robin Ventura, up-and-coming 26-year-old left-handed batter, came to the plate. As coached, he hugged the plate. Ryan threw a high fastball on the inside. Ventura jumped back. To show he was not going to be intimidated, Ventura set up even closer to the plate, and you guessed it, Ryan threw another inside fastball. The combination of Ventura's location and the speed of the fastball, Ryan hit Ventura in the arm, and the umpire sent Ventura to first base. After 2 or 3 steps toward first, Ventura decided to make his infamous charge to the mound. Ryan squared up, and when Ventura reached the pitcher's mound, he grabbed him around the neck and proceeded to beat the crap out of him with his right hand. Benches emptied, mayhem ensued. The rest of the story is history. At that exact moment, the Aussie exclaimed, "This is bloody fantastic! It's starting to make me feel homesick." He then said he understood why Americans love baseball. To this day, I am fairly certain that this extremely excited young Australian believed that having a brawl during a game was a very common experience. I did not want to spoil his baseball adventure. That's from a chapter called Triples. And the chapters in both books called Triples consists of groups of 3 stories that have something to do with each other thematically. In this particular case, the triple has to do with seeing baseball with somebody from a different country. I already can see my time will be running short. So let me read some stories, some other ones quickly. And And then when you guys scream for an encore, I will, I'm minding the time and I'm going to keep this to 40 minutes. There is a famous married couple comedians here in San Francisco. I actually just saw Will Durst in concert the other night. His wife, Debbie, is also a huge baseball fan. This is her story. My first baseball game was when I was 12 years old. All the way to the stick in the car, my dad was telling me how much we don't like the Dodgers. They are our sworn enemy, he said. We're in a tight pennant race and the Dodgers can't win. This was August 1965. Juan Marichal and Sandy Koufax were on the mound. It was very exciting to be in the stands with my dad watching two aces battle it out. The Dodgers scored a couple of runs, and then Marichal hit Maury Wills in his second time at bat. I remember Dad saying something like, "This could get ugly," but I just wanted to finish my hot dog and take in the game. When Marichal came to the plate for his next at bat, Roseboro threw the ball back to Koufax really hard from directly behind Juan, nicking his ear. Marichal looked back at Roseboro and said something. Then Roseboro took off his mask, and all I remember is Juan swinging his bat at Roseboro's head. It all became a blur. Benches emptied, and for 14 minutes there was my first real baseball brawl, live and in person. Marichal was ejected. Roseboro left the game with a bloody towel held against his head. I was pretty excited, although not in a good or happy way, and I realized how much we really don't like the Dodgers. I kept that rivalry alive ever since, of course, without the fighting. Dad continued to take me to Candlestick, often bringing his dad, and I remember my grandfather sitting with his small transistor radio glued to his ear. He had lost his sight by this time, but told me you didn't really need to say baseball to enjoy it. The sound of the ball hitting a glove or a bat, the smell of the grass and hot dogs, Russ Hodges and Lon Simmons, that's all you really needed to enjoy the game. It's because of these two men and that one fantastic day at the Stick that I have my fervent love for the San Francisco Giants. That's from Debbie Durst. I will read this story. This is not a giant story, but we're going with it. We met this couple when we were in Mexico. We met them on the bus going back to the airport. I forgot that we had actually met them on the bus from the airport a week earlier. But she was wearing a Mariners shirt, and I asked her for a story, and this is her story. In July of 2002, our family went to Yankee Stadium to take in the sights and watch a baseball game. It was a hot afternoon. The stadium was packed. Our seats were in the third deck on the first base side, and in this section to our right was a family of about 50 people, ranging in ages from newborn kids to elderly grandparents. I know they were family because I spoke pre-incident with one of the characters. During the game, one of the family members kept dipping his fingers into his beer and dripping it down the pants of his relative sitting in front of him. At one point, I said to my daughter Lisa, who was 12 and very innocent and naive, and my sister-in-law Kathy, this was not going to end well if the beer dripping kept up. Sure enough, around the sixth inning, the drippy had enough. He stood up, visual, lots of tattoos, shorts down below his butt, multiple piercings. He turned around and he landed a right hook onto his relative's jaw. At that point, the majority of the family of 50 started fighting, kids included, pushing, shoving each other down the rows, piling up at the cement wall at the first row. My first thought was, wow, the holidays must really be something at their house. My second thought, these people are going to fall over the edge and end up on the 200 level. At this point, Tattoo Man lost his shorts. They completely came off along with his boxers, right in front of 12-year-old Lisa. She saw everything, and I mean everything. Next, the police and numerous security people arrived and pushed me, Lisa, and Kathy out of our seats and into my husband, Larry. Larry, my brother Mark, and my two sons had no clue what was going on. Larry told me to sit down and watch the game, and I said I couldn't because the police had taken over our seats. He was clueless to the brawl that was taking place. Ultimately, the entire section was ejected from the stadium for fighting. Some were even arrested and taken away in handcuffs. This is a baseball memory that is engraved in our family's memory bank forever, especially Lisa's. I think the Yankees won the game that day. We regularly attend Seattle Mariners games and have never witnessed anything close to this. Yankee baseball at its finest. Must be an East Coast thing. That's from Marie totally in Seattle. As is so often the case, Lynn and I have become friends with her and her family. We've met them all, and they all seem, especially Lisa, fairly well adjusted given what they experienced. I'm going to take just a quick break to tell you a couple of things. Obviously, if anybody wants to buy the book, that's great. I know Gary.
Eric, where I was going to do that when you were done. Best
Okay,
place,
great.
best place to get your books.
Either
I'm
e-
sorry.
either online or if you want a signed copy from me, I'd be happy to do that. I've got books to send. It's the same price as you'd get online. There obviously is a shipping charge, but I'd be willing to split that charge with you.
So is that Amazon?
It's available on Amazon. It's available on Barnes and Nobles, probably other places as well. And again, you can get them from me. Anybody wants a
And
signed
if
copy?
anybody wants a signed copy from Eric, email me and I will forward your email to Eric. And you
Thank
guys
you.
could work out the details.
Thank you. That's great. The second thing I want to say is that there's a good chance that I'm going to do a third book. So if any of you have a story you want to share with me, please do. You can ask Gary for my email address. I'll be happy to send you a book description, although by now you've probably got an idea of what I'm looking for, which is anything. In my book description, I give examples of categories of stories like meeting a player or seeing a special game. And most people that ask me for those guidelines, they give me something completely unrelated to any of those guidelines. So if you want to do that, great.
I think you have a captive audience for that. But before you finish up and tell your however many stories, I noticed baseball to bleachers, ball backyards to ballparks. The third book's got to be two B's. Do you have a working
Well,
title?
no, I don't. And you know, it's funny, and I'm going to get to that in 1 second. The two B's was not intentional. I mean, I was aware of it, but it's not like I set out to do that. I liked the alliteration. The B's just happened to work. But before I do that third book, what I want to tell you about is it became very clear to me that if you enjoy listening to people's stories, you could write books like this about anything. I know I shouldn't say this to a baseball group, but I have a greater love than baseball, and that's music. So my next book is going to be about people's music and concert memories. Um, I'm very excited about this. I don't care what the genre of music is. I don't care who the artist is. I hate opera, but somebody gave me the most incredible opera story. If you have any kind of a story that's related to music or concerts, please send it to me. And I'm going to tell you briefly my greatest musical experience, and it happened in Madison Square Garden in August of 1971. Um, George Harrison was asked by his mentor on sitar, Ravi Shankar, to do a benefit for Bangladesh when Bangladesh became a country. So I'm a Beatles freak. Okay. So I could not miss the chance to see this concert. And it was George and Ringo, Billy Preston, Bob Dylan, Eric Clapton, Leon Russell, my second favorite band of all time, Badfinger, and you're gonna go, huh? Who? My second favorite band of all time. I love these band. I love that band. This was an incredible concert. When Harrison sang the last line of the song Bangladesh for the last time, which is we've got to relieve Bangladesh. And I'm getting goosebumps saying this right now. And I do every one of the 1,000 times I've told this story. When he sang that line and he put his guitar in the stand and he walked off stage, never ever will I forget the incredible ovation that he got. This great man doing this great thing, the first ever benefit concert. It was incredible. And I think about that regularly. I also won't forget what the girl who I was dating said halfway through this concert when she looked at me and she said, "Oh, this is so loud." To which all I could do is look at her and think, but not say, "Oh, you're so not the one for me." My other really brief concert story is my brother's story. He said to me, he loved Herman's Hermits. Honestly, I don't know anybody who didn't, but they're Herman's Hermits. Peter Noon is Herman. He still tours. He's great. He was going to a concert, and my sister-in-law told him, buy a CD, he'll sign it for you. And as Peter Noon is signing the CD, my brother says to him, my brother and I used to argue, debate, fight, whatever word he used. Who was better, Herman's Hermits or the Beatles? My brother thought the Beatles. I thought Herman's Hermits. Peter Noon put down his pen, looked up at my brother, and said, "You was wrong." And um, and that's going to be that story in that book because it really is a great one. Um, I'm going to finish with two quick stories. As I said, I could go on for a million years, but I won't. On October 24th, 2002, I was an 11-year-old on my way to school, as I did most mornings. But when the school bell rang, my dad picked me up to go to Game 5 of the 2002 World Series at AT&T Park, Giants hosting the Angels. This is my first playoff game, and of course, my first World Series game. We sat behind the third base dugout with a good view of home plate. The Giants were leading in the bottom of the seventh, and with JT Snow and David Bell on base, Kenny Lofton hit a shot off the wall. Everyone was standing, and what most of us saw, as much as Snow coming toward home and Bell not far behind, was manager Dusty Baker's 3-year-old son, the bat boy, running out to home plate to pick up Lofton's bat. He was right on course to get the bat just after Snow would have scored, and surely would have been trampled by Bell. As JT crossed home plate, he scooped up Darren by his arm, getting him out of the way of a world of hurt. Watch the video on YouTube sometimes. It's amazing. As you can imagine, there was much chatter in the stands about Darren and JT's alertness and miracle as about what became irrelevant runs. The Giants went on to win the game 16-4. Jeff Kent hitting 2 home runs. By the way, Jeff Kent absolutely belongs in the Hall of Fame, but that's a discussion for another time. Jeff Kent hitting 2 home runs and now led the series 3-2. Major League Baseball later changed the minimum age to be a bat boy. Dusty evidently was yelled at by his mom. Giants and Angels fans and many others remember what happened in Game 6, and I have no need to discuss it here. But I'm pretty sure that everyone in the park that day for Game 5 and everyone watching on TV will never forget that play. That's from Mike Masaka in San Francisco. And I will finish with one story. So I kind of alluded to before the fact that my daughter works for the Giants. She's been running the press elevator for 20 years. Tom and Charles know her. If you listen to Marty Lurie, you'll sometimes hear him talk about elevator Rachel. That's her. She has a story in each book about the people she's met in the elevator. And one was Jeff Kent, but I'm going to read this one. I was 17 years old in my third year as guest services staff member for the Giants. I was serving as a press elevator operator, which in a way sounds dull, but gave me the great opportunity to meet famous people. One day, one of the celebrities rode up and down several times, and finally he looked at me and said in a deep but friendly voice, "Hello, my name is Orlando," long pause, "Cepeda." I looked at him and I smiled sheepishly, and then with a big ear-to-ear smile on my face, I replied, "I know who you are." He said, "And what's your name?" I looked at him for what seemed like hours, although it was probably only 10 seconds, and nothing came out of my mouth. I finally looked at my name tag and said, "Rachel." Ever since then, he just calls me baby. And those are the stories from my books.
Eric, that was fabulous. Really good.
Thank you.
Um, I'm gonna just make a list of things from my personal standpoint, just as you did chapters. In-persons games. The first game I ever went to, 1969, Juan Marichal, 14 innings, loses the game 1-0 to the Mets. Went to Willie Mays' first game as a Met. He, of course, hit the home run. And the greatest game I remember was 2016 Giants Mets, the Madison Bumgarner wild card playoff game. Just fabulous. As far as TV goes, watching 2010, the final out, never thought would happen. And then 2014 also with Mad Bum. And then lastly, in person, but not games. I was fortunate enough to arrange with the Giants trophy tours in New York City.
Nice.
Following the 2010, 2012, and 2014, and Willie Mays coming there. And finally, this past summer, I shared with Norm I spoke at the Gotham Club, and then the Willie Mays Celebration of Life was just events that I can't even ponder could have happened to me. But and lastly, summer of 1972, I don't know how many times I saw the midnight movie of the concert for Bangladesh. Unreal. And then I saw George Harrison. You saw him there. I saw him on his Dark Horse tour, and unfortunately, Eric, he was horrible.
I saw him on that tour actually in Denver. That's a whole different thing. The person I met, I was interviewing for a disc jockey job, and I met a singer who I love that none of you have ever heard of. I always think of her as a British Joni Mitchell. But that same week, he was there in Denver, and I saw that concert as well.
So he was at the in your backyard, the Nassau Coliseum for that show. Mars, you're up. Mars, there
Eric,
you go.
that was those stories are very interesting. So I'd love to get your email because I have stories to relate in baseball and music. I work in the music industry. I write articles, occasional articles, but mostly do photography. Have done it for Downbeat, Jazz Times, Jazz Is, program guides, and all that. So I have a lot of stories to tell
Great.
in music. And one of them was being invited to Electric Ladyland's uh, inaugural party, where I was checking out the equipment, opening room to room in the basement on West A Street. And lo and behold, I open a door and there's Jimi Hendrix sitting alone. I opened the door. He looked at me. He was in a pose like Rodin's Thinker. He looked to the left. I looked at him. We both didn't say a word. I shut the door. And then I think he died in December or January in London of 1971, I believe, in January. So that's one story. Also, the baseball story is I attended as a 10-year-old on my birthday the last Giant Dodger game, played in the Polo Grounds. And I remember watching the trajectory of Hank Sauer's two-run homer, which put the Giants ahead in the fourth inning, 3-2, and it held up. After Mays and Jablonski hit consecutive triples. So one run scored and then Sauer. I remember watching the trajectory of that ball from the upper deck just on the foul side of the right field foul pole as it went into the left field stands. So if you're watching the ball going in that oval across the trajectory into the left field stands, that image is embedded in my mind, right? So I like to relate that, but I have a, a ask you what your opinion is on two records. Um, Hubble struck out five. You mentioned we all know about that one. Hall of Famers. I went to the 1984 All Star game where I believe Dwight Gooden and Fernando Valenzuela tied the record, but I don't think it should be uh, uh, in the record books because Hubble was only one pitcher, and the two pitchers struck out five. And the other thing is about postseason play. Why don't they separate World Series records from playoff games? This dilutes the great World Series records. So what's your opinion on those?
Well, I certainly don't think two pitchers combining for five strikeouts is the same thing as one pitcher throwing five strikeouts. I mean, I completely agree with that. And I mean, everything is different now, right? Because there are so many more playoff games in any given year. So, Mickey Mantle held, maybe still does the most World Series. Well, that's a kind of a different thing. That's home runs because World Series is still only 7 games. But, when you talk about how many home runs does somebody have postseason,
Right.
there are so many more
Games.
games now just to get to the World Series. So it really is kind of apples and oranges.
Right, they should separate them.
Right. I
Thank you
agree.
very much, Eric. I'd like
You're
to get
welcome.
your email so I could write you these
Let me
stories.
just say it right now, and then I'll send it to Gary, and he can send it out. But it's long, but it's simple. It's Eric ERIC dot baseball stories plural at Gmail. Eric.baseballstories at Gmail.
And can
Eric,
I
when
send you
what
some music stories as well?
I usually use Eric.concert stories, but either way it'll get to me, so that's fine.
All
Eric,
right, thank you.
when we're done with this, I will give you a call. We'll talk.
Great,
Okay.
great, great, great.
Bill Clink, you're up.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Eric. Eric, you're operating in a space that others have and continue to operate in, and that is baseball memories. But I will say one thing. The way that you've handled this, the stories that you have related, uh, baseball is sometimes by too many people taken too seriously. And having listened to these stories, I realize baseball is not that serious a game. It's not. The stories that you told will be embedded, as using Mars terms, in my mind. I mean, I don't think I'll ever forget the story, the Seattle story of the lady and the fight in the entire section. I mean, that is something, and the Aussie fan and the fight there. I mean, so many of these, it's just crazy. I'm really in awe because I've written baseball stories, some way too serious. But you're operating in an almost unique area because there is seemingly that thread that's going through it that this is supposed to be fun and it's not all that big. It's a big deal, but sometimes we make it too big a deal. I'll leave you with this, and then you can comment. But I'm not going to write a story for you. I don't know if I could add anything, Eric, but I'm going to give you a possible title for the next book. Why not off the wall baseball stories you won't hear anywhere else? Because that seems to be epitomize the stories that you are bringing to us. They are off the wall, and that has a double meaning for those of us following baseball.
Sure. Well, thank you, Bill. I'm actually quelling a little bit. One thing I'm very proud of is, and I think you guys have had him on your program, John Leonidakis, my friend, who Charles and Tom know very well as well. And what he has said to me is, and I'll never forget this. He said, "You are doing what nobody else is doing, which is connecting the generations and telling the stories from the person's standpoint." I mean, I didn't set out to do that. I knew this was not an academic book, but that's okay. Other people have called me a connector, and this makes me feel really great. I mean, this isn't going to be, studied in a college class, but I know that they give people a lot of joy. And Bill, thank you for that. That's just, thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm awed. I had no idea what this was going to be about, but it's such a different take. I'm going to get at least one of the two books and read them just based on, I don't want to say the oddity of it, but it's really, this stuff is off the wall. It's not the typical, I saw a game and this happened and wow, this guy hit a home run or this guy hit a pitch to no hitter. Well, we've all heard those stories, Eric.
Right.
The stories
I'm
you've
proud
heard
of this.
are unbelievably unique.
Yeah, again, thank you. I am so proud of this. And again, Gary's going to get you the information. If anybody wants them from me, I mean, I'll even pay the shipping if you want. I just, I like to sign the book, and it'll never be just enjoy Eric Gray. There'll be a note in there, but
thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Eric, by the way, if you didn't know, there's probably a half a dozen members in here who live in San Francisco. So they're in your company. So let's go.
Anybody
I
there?
I think Garrett's note is going to be next time pay the postage. I'm just kidding.
Is anybody on? I mean, aside from Charles and
Yes.
Tom, of
course. Norm is from San Francisco. Michael Berlin is from San Francisco. No, where are you, Michael? Unmute, Michael.
Yeah.
The Evil Empire, Los Angeles.
Oh, I hope you're well.
Oh.
Russ is in San Francisco. He's a worker at Oracle Park. Maybe he knows. Maybe he knows your daughter even.
I'm in Pacific Heights.
I don't, but I will certainly look her up the next time up in the press box. In fact, I'm going to work in about 45 minutes. We've got a private tour tonight for a few hours. So,
Russ, do you live in San Francisco or
in San Carlos?
Okay. I am going to be doing a talk at the San Carlos Library Norm and anybody else that's in San Francisco, we're going to be doing some talks at our home at probably the beginning, well, in the middle of February and then again in March. So please come. And what we do is we read stories and we provide ballpark appropriate snacks.
When are you doing the San Carlos one?
I think it's San Carlos. Let me.
That's all right. I go by the library all the time. I'll check.
Well, I mean, I want to make sure I'm not making a mistake. Send me an email or I'll get your email.
Okay.
And I just got 6 libraries in San Mateo. So
cool.
I think San Carlos.
Eric Russ is a tour guide at the stadium. And of course, Tom O'Doul and Charles, they're both from San Francisco. Let's go.
I'm in Pacific Heights.
And Mars also. Paul, go ahead.
Right.
Yeah, Eric, thank you so much. That was really great.
Yes, Frank.
To listen to those stories. And I've got a couple that I think I will send you. I had 2 questions. One is related to your book. So when people give you the accounts and you publish them in your book, do you list their name and the date it was given to you, or do you just organize it according to topic and just leave it that way? I was just curious.
No, I don't know if you can see it. Everybody's name goes in the book. I don't do the date, Okay. And in fact, at one point in one of the introductions, I said some of these stories, when I talk about happened 2 years ago. By the time the book came out, it was 5 years ago. But everybody's name, except for the people who have asked to be anonymous. In a couple of cases, I understand why. With a good friend of mine, I have no idea why he wanted to be anonymous. There's nothing about his story that would be embarrassing. Sure. But so no, absolutely everybody's name is included. I don't want to take credit for anybody else's story.
Sure. And the other question is more personal. Did you go through the Plainview Public Schools?
I did.
Because my brother Dave was a foreign language teacher at the high school or middle school at Matlin Junior High.
I went to Matlin.
And he was a soccer coach. He was Dave Graham.
I don't know that name.
That's okay. No problem.
It's funny because
throw it out there.
I wish that, my son is big into soccer, and I wish I had played soccer as a kid. I always thought that soccer seemed to be the people that didn't make the football team, and I had no interest in playing football. So he was in the middle school?
Yeah, he was in Matlin Junior High, and then he went to the high school after, but he was there and he coached soccer at the high school level all the way through.
I graduated Kennedy High School in 70.
Okay. Yeah, he had Mark Ivoroni as a student, he remembers telling me.
Basketball player. I think he's the only famous person out of Plainview. I do remember that.
Yeah, right. Yep. Okay. Thanks again, Eric.
Thank you.
Michael Berlin, Norm, Ken, then Frank Lewis, and then Tom O'Doul. Michael Berlin.
I'll make it quick. First of all, Eric, thank you. As everyone else said, I loved listening. 2 things very quickly. First of all, I was commissioned to do a movie on Badfinger. On here. Because it's obviously some story of suicides and mismanagement, and then the music got complicated, just as an aside. But the other thing was, when I was listening to this and thinking like everyone else about the great stories, you reminded me of something, and I just share this very quickly. The New York Times and Sunday magazines, in the back page of the magazine, they used to run like an editorial about men. And a guy had written a story about, he was up in Boston, Red Sox fan, live and died it, took his son for his 10th birthday, surprised him, tickets behind home plate, takes him to batting practice, hot dog, cotton candy, loving it. The game starts and the kid says, I want to go home. The guy argues with him. He goes through this whole thing. The kid says, I want to go home. He goes, how can you leave? It's like the first inning. Dad, I want to leave. They get in the car. The kid has his head down. The guy is steaming. They drives past the Science Museum, and the kid said, it's my birthday. I want to go there. They go. He has a great time. And when he leaves, the kid says to him, Dad, Fenway was your dream, not mine. That story always stays with me. I think for all of us, I lived and died New York Giant baseball. I lived near Ebbets Field. We have all those stories. But I think to myself, that's my history. I love the memories, and I love this group because we all share those. When that kid said that to his father, I thought, you know what? It's a big world, and there are other interests,
That's a great story.
So for what it was worth. Anyway, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I definitely would like to talk to you about Badfinger at some point.
Oh, I went to a Beatle convention to meet the last remaining member, and I looked around and I thought to myself, of 1,000 people, there was not a single person there that was alive when the Beatles were together. That was
Yeah.
50 years ago.
Yeah, I've met Joey Mullen 3 times, and I've got a couple of pictures taken with him. I mean, let's talk sometime.
I would love to. I have a poster up here I was going to show you from I went to Shea Stadium. My sister dragged me to the concert. I never even heard of the guys, to sit behind second base and listen to the Beatles.
Nice.
Anyway, I'd love to share those with you.
Great.
Thank you, Michael. Storm and Norman.
Eric, my head is spinning from everything you talked about today. The stories were great. You made me laugh, made me almost cry a few times.
That's the goal.
It's exactly what I live for. I'll just very quickly, when you first started, I just wrote down 10 moments or 10 baseball games I attended that were meaningful, the same way that Gary just did. My first opening day in 1964, and this year will mark my 60th opening day. Dravecki's comeback game, Pablo's 3 home run game, Matt Williams, that all those foul balls, that home run in the '89 playoffs, Matt Cain's perfect game. The 3 of them you talked about. Mark Scudero's catch in the rain.
I was there. That was unbelievable. Remember, it rained all day. It stopped before the game, and it didn't start again till the bottom of the 8th?
Yeah, pretty much.
And then it was pouring.
Oh, that was unbelievable. It was biblical. I mean, the rain was almost biblical.
I was at that game too.
Lincecum's 14 strikeouts against the Braves. Bond's 71 and 72. The earthquake game, and the World Series with Darren Baker, but also we scored 16 runs that game. And I mean, what a great game. I sat next to Will Durst at a vintage baseball game. I have a WC Handy Music Award story I could tell you sometime. And I'm going to be John Leodakis' guest at his next podcast. And so if you go to those things, then I'll see you there.
Yeah, and you live in the city?
I live in Millbrae.
Let's be in touch if you want to come. I mean, obviously, the readings I normally do are different than this because I focus this on a lot of Giants. They're the kinds of stories I would have read if I wasn't focusing on Giant stuff would have been somewhat different. If you're interested, let's be in touch.
I am interested. I'll send you an email. It's going to say it's from Willie Mays. It's not really Willie Mays, it's me. You'll know that.
Got it.
The other thing is, I want to reciprocate. I've got my own little museum here. Charles has been
incredible.
Here. Gary's been here. Mars has been here, and John has been here also. If you'd like to come see what I have, you are welcome.
Absolutely.
Norm, I got to tell you, I think you had a slip up there. I thought I heard World Series.
I got excited, Gary.
Serious.
Yes, I say World Series, Eric.
Norm's museum, it's almost like being in the Baseball Hall of Fame.
It's unbelievable. It's all Giant.
So I just wanted to thank you. I'm sorry it took so long, but I just was so moved by everything that you've talked about. You got me excited. That's why I said World Series instead of Series. So thank you, Eric.
And I've got stories in the books from a lot of the events that you mentioned. I mean, I wasn't at the '89 I wasn't at the World Series game. I wasn't even a Giants fan until my kids turned me one in '92. That story about their first game is the introduction to my first book. But I was in Washington, D.C. for work. And so, I certainly wasn't at that game, but there's a story from someone who was.
Thank you, Norm.
I like that 18-inning game with Brandon Belt.
Ken, you are up again. My condolences to your family.
Gary, really appreciate that. It's been a tough 4 months losing your stepdad and your mom, but life has to go on. So
well,
I really appreciate
my condolences too, Ken.
I appreciate the text you sent. It meant a lot. Mr. Gray, I really appreciated your stories because it's going to give me some ideas. Gary knows I will definitely email to get 2 books signed from you because that's what I do. I collect books signed. I've got about 850 right now in my library that I've collected over the last 35 years. 2 quick stories from me that I probably could have shared if I know you were writing a book like this was me being an 18-year-old kid sitting in a golf cart next to Mickey Mantle, and we talked for 15 minutes. It was so incredible. The next story would be me being the first person to see Nolan Ryan as a non-professional baseball player up at his home in Arlington, 8 o'clock that Monday morning, getting some signatures on contracts from Louisville Slugger. What I liked about your books is that you've given me an idea, because Gary knows I want to write a book. I was a banker for about 50 professional athletes, baseball and football. Don't want to so much touch on their baseball or football on the gridiron or the field, but more personal, how I got to know these guys. And so I will definitely get your 2 books. I will read them, and I think that will give me a great idea to how to move forward to talk about some of these players that I did business with. I have a Hall of Famer. Pudge Rodriguez was my bank customer. Rafael Palmeiro, Tom House, the stories he told me I could have shared with you were just amazing. He talked about when he caught Hank Aaron's 715th home run in the dugout. It was just amazing stories like that. So your books are going to be a catalyst for how I write my book in the future. So I want to let you know I appreciate being on here to hear that.
Well,
and for all of y'all, your condolences, I really appreciate it from my mom and my stepdad. It's really thankful for hearing that from y'all.
Hey, Ken, you might want to tilt your screen. We don't see the top. There you go. That's better.
Well,
thank you.
It's
me.
like what I always tell people, I'll do a 3rd book if I get enough stories without killing myself. And I really want to do a 3rd book because I have fulfilled my desire, which is to take my 2 granddaughters each to their first game. And when I wrote the 2nd book, when we did the 2nd book and we were thinking about a photo, I mean, I think it's really clear to you guys that you don't, women as well as men love these stories. The women have a lot of stories in the book, not as many as men, but a lot. And I wanted the book and the cover to appeal to both genders and multiple generations. So I have this. I don't know if you can see it. That's a picture of my granddaughter, who was 2 at the time, having a catch with my son, and I've written up the stories about going to their first
Somebody
game.
shut off their. Somebody has their. Please mute. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you for your words.
Thank you, Ken. Mr. Lewis, you are up.
I think that was a great job. My story is too short, but back in the days when there were the football Yankees, I was sitting with Dad. I'm 10 years old in 5th grade, waiting for the beginning of a New York Yankees football game. And I think it's the same guys that play baseball. I expected to see Joe DiMaggio and all the baseball Yankees trotting out on the field in football uniforms. But we changed sports in grade school with the season. And my dad explained to me, no, it was different players.
That's great. Frank, why don't you tell Eric how old you are? Frank?
You come up with that. It's no secret. I'm 86.
There you go.
And by the way, Frank, no story is too short. I mean, frankly, I am absolutely fine with short stories. The more, I mean, none of these was all that long that I read. The more short-ish stories I get, the more stories I can put into a book. And I'm really more about honoring people giving me stories than I am about. I mean, I've got a couple of really long ones in there that takes 8 or 10 minutes to read, and that would have taken all my time here. But no story is too short.
Hey, Frank, you look great, by the way. I got to tell you, it's so much nice not just seeing your forehead. You look good.
We're not going to 86 him.
For me to take those screenshots, I got to lean forward, and I can't be fully.
You look fabulous. We're going to go to Tom, and then Renee is going to wrap it up. Tom, you're up.
You on mute here? Okay. First, Eric, thanks for reading my story. Appreciate it.
Of course, Tom. You're my good friend.
I've got a million of them. I'm not quite as old as Frank, but I'm pretty close. I'm right behind you, Frank. I'm 82. But my first game was 58 was when the Giants and the Dodgers played at Seal Stadium. My dad took me out of school. One day I missed that year. And Dad says, "You're not going to school today. You're going to go see Willie Mays." So I finally got to see my hero, Willie Mays. at that 8-0 game. Shut out. Eric, I was at the perfect game. And also my baby daughter was there too. I didn't know she was there until the game was over. And she comes down to me and hugging me and saying, "Hey, Dad, it was a perfecto." But I've got a million stories and I'll share them with you. And good luck and hang in there. Thanks
Great.
again.
I hope we see each other soon.
Soon.
All right, Renee, you are
Eric,
going to be the last speaker tonight.
Eric, great to have you. And like everybody here, I'm a big fan of listening to stories. I mean, I have my baseball stories, sports stories with family, my daughter, my wife, going to games. But one quick one that I mentioned a couple of years ago, I didn't think about it, and it just hit me again. There was a documentary about the Yankees. I think it was in Netflix. Well, real quick, I had one of the guys that I work with. His roommate was a huge Yankee fan, huge, and hated Steinbrenner to no end. And this was at a time when you can go to a game and bring a banner. Banners were fine to bring. And when I tell you this story, I was surprised that this was on the New York Post in one of the columns. And it's been years later on ESPN, and on this docu, it's in there. Anyway, we go to the apartment. The guy Andrew brings out this huge blanket, huge. And I said, "What's on it?" And he said, "Don't worry about it." Something like that. It's so long ago. We go over there and I'm worried. Oh my God. And he called security. I'm not going to say what he called them, but big Yankee fan. We're sitting in the upper deck. So it's unraveling. And one of the guys of the four of us are sitting in the last row and he unravels it. And I read it. And I'm going like, oh my God, if the cops come over, I hope we don't because I want to see this game. The banner says we're one owner away from a championship. Floored that it was in the papers. Floored that it was on this documentary. I was like, oh my God, after all these years, there it is. Surprised. We did get tossed out. They left that, they didn't touch us. Very surprised with that. And another quick thing is I was really fortunate to had a part-time job and a full-time job at Madison Square Garden. My first concert that I snuck up to see was ZZ Top opening up for Blue Oyster Cult. And I was at the Garden from 77 to 95, 96. So there was a world of stuff. Even the Felt Forum got to see a bunch of artists. First time, long time, had a great time. And you brought me thinking about that when you talked about concerts and stuff that I was fortunate to see.
When you went to that concert, were you going to see Blue Oyster Cult?
No. Believe me when I tell you, that was the first I've never went to a concert. Never. And working there, never imagined to go upstairs. But there were some guys there that worked, as part-timers with security, and I got to know them really well. And we were talking. I said, I've never been to a show. Well, come on. I said, are you serious? I said, no, I'll take you up there.
Well, the reason I ask is, I don't know how the book is going to be chaptered until I get the stories. I mean, when I did the baseball book, I mean, I had some idea about stories, but I will tell you guys, I was sitting on my living room floor with 25, 30 piles of paper, each pile representing a potential chapter. So as we say out in California, and God help me for saying this, the book came together organically. I mean, things just kind of made sense. But the reason I ask that is because there could well be a chapter about you went to see who? In other words, you went to see a harp, but the opening act is and that was, somebody mentioned Jimi Hendrix before. There's a story from a friend who gave me about going to see the Monkees and Hendrix open for it. And, I mean, that's just a great story.
I'm just happy that you didn't cry, Renee.
It doesn't happen all the time, Gary.
I know.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary.
All right, guys, why don't we give it up for Eric Gray? Eric, it was fabulous. These two books,
Thanks,
again,
Eric.
available on Amazon, or you could email me and Eric will sign them and you guys can discuss, shipping and all that stuff.
Can I just add one thing, please?
Sure.
You know, I've done hundreds of book talks, some of them for 40 people, some of them for 3. I've done audiences, I've done Zoom things where people just kind of sit there and they say they liked it, and there was no, you guys are amazing. I mean, and I'm not bullshitting, okay? I mean, I wouldn't say anything if I didn't mean it. What a I mean, first of all, I'm getting goosebumps from all the nice things you guys have said, but to do something like this, to have so many people react, it's just so gratifying. So thanks to all of you.
Wonderful. Eric, please don't be a stranger, even though, you don't have to be the speaker to attend any of our events.
I will make a point of coming to more of them.
Great. And after I'm done, I will give you a call. We need to talk.
Great.
Eric, do you like Simon and Garfunkel?
I'm sorry?
You like Simon and Garfunkel?
Do I love Simon and Garfunkel?
I like them.
Yes, I do.
I saw them at Shea Stadium.
Nice.
Back in the 80s. And I never had trouble getting out of a Met game with all the traffic. It took us like 2 hours to get out of the parking lot after that. It was Shea was sold out, and it took us forever to get out of there, but it was a great concert.
Tell me the story. I actually saw them when they did a reunion tour. I'm thinking it was early 80s.
Yeah. 81 at the Oakland Coliseum?
No, outside, yes.
Eric, you're probably too young for this, but the greatest rock group ever, musically, were the Cream. Clapton, Baker, and Jack Bruce.
I'm not too young for that. I was born in 52. I remember Cream quite well. I don't go deep with their stuff, but I certainly know all about them.
Well, I
saw
worked
Yeoman
in State
Brothers.
Penn at the Fillmore for about 8 or 9 months. The old Fillmore, then the transition to the Carousel Ballroom. And they were the greatest rock, musically speaking, the greatest rock band I've ever seen.
No.
All right. We are going to meet again next Thursday with William Behrens. Russ, I hope if you're still here, if you can get some of your Oracle Park people to attend, it'll be wonderful. I expect next week to be, a fabulous meeting, just as tonight's was. But until then, have a great night, everybody. I'll hang around a little bit tonight. And take care.